So that's a pretty big kind of rundown of things. I grew up in Port of Spain. I'm from Belmont. That was in the bio, that was in the bio, that was in the bio, that was in the bio. And then there's some other stuff at the end that wasn't in the bio, but relevant. In the bio, not in the bio, curation stuff. So over time I've curated like a few things. Dark Knight was a series that was a part of Anime Carib in the past. That was animation that we would curate, like things that dealt with like mature content. So I worked on that for like a couple of years. Back in 2011, I think to about 2013, I used to do this thing called Film Night, spelled correctly, that I used to run in bars around Port of Spain. And Mission Black Satellite was a short-lived project that I was doing in Arima. And I Am One was or is an LGBTQ organization that I used to provide support with. These other two things were in the bio. So cool. In the Interim, Ritual Ground for a Future Black Archive is a collaboration between myself and Christopher Paul Jordan. Him pictured on the left, that's me if you didn't recognize. And we had applied, I think in 2016, amongst grants that we had applied to. And the way how when I apply for things is I just apply and forget about it. Because, you know, if you get, they'll contact you. If you don't get, they'll contact you. They don't contact you. So that's how it works. So I forgot about it. And at some point in 2017, they reached out and told us that we had received this grant. You can go to the next one, yeah. So we'd received this grant, and it was in collaboration with the Frye Museum in Seattle. So James W. Ray is the funding agency. That museum is the institution that was like facilitating the exhibition and the work that we were trying to create. And pretty early on when we started the conversation around the work, because what we had applied to exhibit had kind of changed by the time we awarded it, because it was almost like a year apart in timeline, right? And our work is pretty grounded in our communities and our experiences, like mine and Chris's. And this institution didn't necessarily reflect that. So I think at the time, and I don't want to completely skew it, but I think at the time the Frye had maybe one Asian member of staff, and then like everyone else was who they were, which was, you know, not a person of color. And so so we pretty early knew that we wanted to work with a curator who kind of understood or would have an understanding of the work that we wanted to make, and also had a Caribbean background. And so Claire Tankins, who's been to Trinidad probably more times than she can count, who is from Guadeloupe, I believe. We reached out to her. She's a pretty big name curator. Like, she's done the Sharjah, she's curated at the Guggenheim, she's done massive shows. So we were pretty intimidated, but reflected on the fact that the worst answer you could get is no. And so we reached out to her and she told us, yeah, she was occupied when we were initially trying to schedule the exhibition to take place, which I think was initially in 2018. And then when we followed back up with her, was like, she was just pretty clear, it doesn't matter when it is, she'll make time to work on this show, not knowing that it was going to be in 2022. So yeah. So this is the show as it looked to me for much of it. We moved the date, as I said. I think in 2018 was like a date, and then I think 2019 was a date, and then for a number of reasons. I'm just kind of skimming over that. 2020 was a date. We all know what happened in 2020. 2021 became a date. And then finally in 2022, this exhibition. So with all of that going on, we planned this exhibition in SketchUp. So I myself never actually saw the exhibition in person, just because of how travel, pandemic, visa, all them thing works out. So this is how the exhibition looked to me for years. I was just moving paintings around in SketchUp. And these are photographs from the actual show. And you can rotate through these just for time. You can do it like relatively, yeah. If anyone wants to pause, ask questions, you're free to as we're going through this. The exhibition, I'll get into that because there's actual like blown up stills of some of the works in the piece. So I can get to that. The exhibition is pretty much, talk about that for a bit. For me and Chris, it's a call and response. So Chris is primarily a painter. He always says he learned to paint in Trinidad. He himself is a muralist, and so he started working as an artist on really large scale. So he's accustomed, like the smallest paintings I think he used to do were at least 3 stories tall, right? And so in Trinidad, he started, he did an exchange program with UE, and there's where he started to work on paintings more conventionally as we would think about them on a canvas. And so now his practice is pretty studio-based, and you're going to see that reflected here. So you're going to see his paintings and my photographs. Some of my photographs are prints in this exhibition, and some of them are projected in the exhibition. So when I say it's a call and response, we started off looking at, I think, the most pertinent to us issues within our communities. And so coming out of that, Chris focused on, I think we could pause there for now? Yeah. So thank you. I think Chris started focusing on what was happening to his community. So he's from a place called Hilltop in Tacoma, Washington, and it's been massively gentrified. So his paintings are on actual window frames from houses that are no longer there. It's one, I think it was the first and only, like primarily like black community in Tacoma. I'm gonna skip over the history lesson. Indigenous folks, European folks, African folks moving across the US during different points of, Jim Crow, etc. And so for a long time, it was bad for them to settle, like actually own land in Tacoma. And so he's from Hilltop where they settled. A gentrification has happened, and so it's a thing that I'd been hearing about. I was fortunate enough to go last year and to just actually look at an area that was black community, like black homes, and just see that none of it, and I mean none of it is there, added a level of reality to the work that he has been making. So most of his paintings, a lot of his paintings, at least the earliest ones, were inspired by these scrapyards, junkyards, landfills from these pieces of homes that were dismantled for the new developments that have been going on in this community. For myself, I've been focusing on climate change. I think we're feeling, and we have been feeling, the impacts of it for a while. And the science is pretty clear, as far as I'm seeing, to what we're in for, which includes rising sea levels, harsher droughts, harsher hurricane seasons, and a lot of just climate instability. And so for me, amongst the other things that I think are on the surface for Trinidad, one of which is like, being from Belmont, I went from not hearing as many gunshots every day to now pretty much I could count on at least 10 shots a day ringing out in the air. But for this exhibition, I do fundamentally believe that the pressures of climate change compact some of the other societal and social things that we're experiencing. And so for this exhibition, I focused on climate. So in this image, you're seeing this blue box, right, in the center of the room. So when Chris and I, amongst the things we were conceptualizing is we had read Zora Neale Hurston's Barracoon. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that text. So it's an American text, it's a US text by Zora Neale Hurston. She is, amongst things, anthropologist, a cultural studies expert. And in 1908? I think it's like 1907, she recorded verbatim, so in dialect, the testimony, the life experiences of the last known living survivor of enslavement in the US. And in 2017, that text was published. So it took 100 years for that text to be published. Part of the reason that that text, amongst the things that that text is credited for having taken so long to be published, is because publishers, for the length of that time, across the 100 years, were unwilling to publish something that wasn't in standard English. And so, inspired by that, Chris and I embedded within this work that we were developing a space for persons who identify as Black to record their stories as they feel to express themselves, record them, that we would then lock into a time capsule and then store as it is verbatim for another 100 years. That was an interesting experience because it got us very heavily into legal work. How do we negotiate with an institution to, on its compound, encrypt, so the recordings are immediately encrypted. We wanted to do that to prevent anyone from interfering with, including ourselves, what people record in these private booths, anyone records in this private booth. And create this possibility, this space for a future generation, someone who we may, unless some of us really gonna, be 100+ years old, people who we would know interact with. Go for it, Chad. Yeah, good. That's a good question. I don't remember off the top of my head.
A hard drive or something?
Yeah, it's recorded onto a hard drive. So why I mentioned the legal work, in this agreement, these encrypted files, the museum is obligated to update its storage device over the next 100 years. Okay. So as technology advances, they are contractually obligated by our exhibition to upgrade what that file is transferred onto. And so the key to decrypt it is stored separately from the actual device. And that's why I said it was a long process. It really was, and it kind of makes sense, I guess, that we developed this work over the course of 5 years. The more I think back on it, but initially we didn't intend the development period to be as long as it ended up being. Any other questions? Good? We good? Okay, cool. So that's what this chamber is. Also a fun thing to design remotely. Also a fun thing to plan for during COVID-19 restrictions. That included, conversations with, this was a very trippy experience for me to be on Zoom and actually having meetings with fire officers in Seattle about an installation in our exhibition. There were many consultations, including because, as I had mentioned, for those of you who may have just stepped into the room, because of some of the limitations, like the kind of like cultural and racialized limitations of the institution, we also had them hire cultural facilitators from the US context, so like Black-run organizations to come in and help that facilitate how they would interact with this work. Because as I'm going on, you may realize that like there's layers and layers and layers of things that we've added on to developing this body of work. So yeah, you could rotate, thank you. So this is where folks would enter. I think we had a online sign up that you would, enter information online and that kind of stuff. You'd be given a key. And then when you come to the exhibition, you could enter that passcode into the door and enter the room privately and record. I think because of COVID-19 restrictions and ventilation and other stuff, I think in the end, we were only allowed to record one person a day. So one person throughout the course of the exhibition, which ran from February to May 2022. Yeah. So cool.
Did you have somebody every day? Because that sounds fascinating to me.
I saw the tally in the end, so I don't think it was every day, but we had a significant amount of folks, but still not as many as we could have had. And unfortunately, I would say, I think it's one of the areas that just didn't match our vision for it. We were hoping more folks could participate in it, but it was a tough time, y'all. Yeah, would you rotate? Yeah, so you can rotate because these are just other angles of the installation. So I'm just like, do I want to identify the model for this piece? I'll just talk about this piece. In the conversation that I was having with the audience about climate change, I delved into specific aspects of Trinidadian Afro-Caribbean culture. So for this, I was inspired very much by Mama de Glo because part of our folklore, she's protector of the rivers. Very much inspired by Oshun, very much inspired by, which I think is an interesting to see, gold as a proxy for yellow, which is a color that's known to be associated with Oshun, and gold in particular in rivers, because we know that one of the things attributed to European invasion into the Americas was the search for gold, and quite often it was sifted out of, many different places, but can be sifted out of rivers. And so in these images, I was seeking to kind of, symbolically return this material to its source. Yeah, good rotate. The works you're going to see, so each of these characters are messengers. The series is, each image is titled Messengers and numbered. I tried to keep it very binary. So it's a name with numbers. And it's not particularly important. It was more of a way of me keeping track of things. But also I like the abstraction that creates. I worked with different makers throughout Trinidad and Tobago. So I worked with makers in Toco, in Port of Spain, in Tunapuna, Claxton Bay, all to develop different parts of the costuming that you will see these messengers are wearing. So much of this you may recognize. So I'm just going to talk about this piece just for a little bit. I was very much inspired by wreath mass. Is anyone familiar with wreath mass? You are. Is anyone else? So wreath mass was a really popular mass long before all of our lives. Up and down the Caribbean, it's a mourning mass. Quite typically, folks would, yeah, like grieving, mourning.
Okay.
Yeah. Folks would adorn themselves with, as you see here, like dried leaves, but like dead things. And it was part of just this not just, but part of this ritual practice of mourning loss. And I leveraged that in a lot of the work because for me, at least, in dealing with these notions of climate change, of drought, etc., drought, hurricane, etc., the relationship with water for me became more apparent and clearer when I started to create work where there was an absence of moisture. So the frame for this piece is, which you won't see, but the underlying frame of it is actually like a sailor mask costume. So the piece for me, like, completely is dealing with cyclical in my mind about relationships with water. Yeah, next one. In that kind of concept of, again, reversal in a way, seeking water by positioning the absence of it at the fore. Anyone who's familiar with fancy sailor like backpacks, in that development process of reversing in a way, I was interested in also like inverting and reversing that backpack, and so I arrived at this floating mask in this. So, yeah. Cool. Any questions? Speed up, slow down, anything? Are you good so far?
I have a question, but maybe it might be for the end.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
How much, sorry, another question.
Mm-hmm.
How much influence you had on the costume design?
Oh, I designed all the costumes.
Oh, so you did all the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so my practice of late has been very much in a carnival tradition. So I've been making costumes. I've been going on the road for much of my life in my own costumes, undistinguishable to anybody. So I don't have photographs of it, but I've just been making costumes most carnivals. It's only, I think, I want to say like maybe since 2017, maybe till like recently, I've been playing with Robert Young, who does vulgar fraction. But since I was in secondary school, I've just been tinkering away in my house, making a costume, going out on the road, seeing some of you, and coming home and nobody knew I was on the road. So, so that type of design making has always been a part of what I've been doing. And so I would say more recently, it's become the series of photographs. I've been designing these costumes, creating these stories, and creating these photo stories. Yeah.
And these designs were directly based on the story?
So I wrote this story. I have it, but for me, it's not that important that viewers necessarily need to engage with that story. I like for folks to, the way I view it is that people are always experiencing a work from wherever they are. And I mean that in like its broadest sense. Like, a work can have layers of political meaning, But if you don't know that history and you're not even invested in that way of thinking, you're going to perceive it from where you stand in relationship, your own meaning. So because meaning shifts, I'm not that pressured, but I think that story is on the Frye's website. I think it is. I'm not certain. But yeah, I just present the images as they are and allow folks to interpret. As a kind of left turn on this, so these images I captured during lockdown. So I kind of they're always a reminder for me that like every one of these images was illegal at the time. Because we weren't allowed to be, you know, in the Caroni swamp, like at the river, like on the beaches. So every time I see this work, I'm just like, oh yeah, that happened. The base for this I was really inspired by, I'm going to skip over all of that detail. At the bow of ships, there have been historically these figures that ideally clear the path for safe journey. And so I kind of attach notions of Oya priestesses particularly to this. I worked with a guy who typically does beaded curtains in Tobago to do this mask that is, for me, inspired by Egungun mask. And I always like enjoy those experiences because I'll be like, hey, I see you doing this, and you're real good at it. I could hire you to make something like it, but not it. And then just going through that of like negotiating with this person to work in an unconventional way at what they're already an expert at. For me, that's how it's like playing out. So he was like, you know, I don't really deal up in masks and I don't really make masks. I was like, no, man, it's art we making. Don't worry about it. Just, you know, it's just a mask. And it's your work, so it had to be sanctified. Don't worry, there's no devil in this. Yeah.
It's interesting. When I first looked at this image, it looked as though she's facing outwards, but I guess it's that same idea of that reversal thing.
Exactly, yeah. I also like that you, because I did say priestess, because I was inspired by priestesses. That's the word? When you pluralize it? Yeah. Let's go with it. But ideally, again, doesn't really matter, but for me, I didn't necessarily like gender any of the messengers. A bit of the lore, as I say, I'm like kind of going through and just being like, okay, part of the lore that I developed for this body of work is that each of these messengers uses a body of water to enter our world. So that's part of that relationship. This is made out of bamboo, jumbi seeds, found shells. I'm going to skip on the other material. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's like that heavy, but it has a little weight to it. I agree. Yeah, because of the length and the materials. But they're all, usually when I design very light, with very light materials, with like weight with the weight of it is always in mind whenever I design.
How do you like this one?
Team of friends who were supporting on this one. Another person who was there, Scott Marchak, Robert Young was there.
All you on the boat?
All of us on the boat, yeah. Those boat operators have seen some things. we got quite a story on this. Yeah, there's a story I'll give you all about one of these shoots. That's not happening again in this life.
Over how long a period was it?
Was the work captured? I would say, as I said, the development was the longest. I developed this over the course of 5 years. I shot this body of work, I think, over the course of 3 months. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of brilliant people helped me. Yeah, this piece is very much inspired by Oya for me. As I was thinking about, amongst the things in climate change, the shifting of currents, the shifting of weather patterns, and her connections with that. And so I worked with some of you who have been to some of the local like artisan markets may recognize the cording work on this. It's her. So I worked with her on this piece. I just don't know why. If any of you all remember, anyone recognizes it? Because I don't know why her name is just failing me right now. It'll come back to me in a sec. But it's the same artist who's been at all of those artisan markets. So I worked with her on this. Again, these repeating cyclical patterns, also embedding these colors that are connected with this orisha. You could rotate as well. The skin, I used, for me, silver, because crystal is associated with Oya. Silver was a proxy for me for that. Oya tends to carry 2 blades, I think, in representation. So that's there in the work. And then ultimately, when I'm shooting, I'm just playing. Thinking about bodies of water, and connection in particular to carnival traditions, we get into the juve of it all. And so I went to Bunzi, it's Bunzi Mud Volcano. That was an experience. So during lockdown, folks was really using them trails. And villagers didn't necessarily like the kind of extra traffic that was going through. And so I was told, which, whether that's true or not, is what I was told, is that the community did what they had to do to kind of deter that extra traffic. And so that roadway was torn up. I had the support of Johan Medford at North 11 with his truck and his mechanic's truck to get in to do this shoot. This to date, I would say, is probably the most dangerous shoot I've been on. The fall hazard level was probably at a 99.9%. It took us, I think that's normally from at least like the road, once you get into Bunzi Trace, it's probably like a 45-minute walk. It took us 3 hours to wrench the trucks through the mud each way. It rained intensely, so I felt the power of that connection with water. And it cleared up just for me to capture these images before coming down again with rain. It was, in its own way, a beautiful moment, but wrenching trucks through thigh-high mud at night is not an experience that I ever want to have again. Yeah. So this messenger is using the mud volcano as a portal. It's fantastic working with this model who was a trooper. She was an absolute trooper. So these are ceremonial shields. They were woven by Shaman Adonis from the Napoyo community. Well, I don't just use first peoples because I'm not actually certainly identified that way, but what I wanted, and this is why I've been talking about all of these folks that I've worked with to create this work, is because I was creating this time capsule and this archive, I wanted not just my work to be in it, but I also wanted to cement for a future generation all of these other practitioners from Trinidad and Tobago in that work. And so that they're all a part of that archive. Yeah. Any questions?
In a couple of previous shots in this one, you used a lot of blues and whites. Was that costume planned to be shot against the sky like that? Or is that just...
Yeah, no, absolutely. For me, sky and bodies of water are reflections of each other. And so, yeah, it was always that. And when I started photography, one of the things I reflected on was the use of studio spaces. And this is just in my head. I love studios. But I felt pretty early on that outdoor spaces were the space for me to work in general, because I've always felt like Trinbagonian climate is more predictable. I just kind of wake up on a morning. I never watch a weather reporter. I have friends who like Jonathan, who always tell me I watch the weather, right? I never watch the weather report. I just kind of wake up on a morning, like feel the air pressure, watch outside and be like, okay, that's gonna be the weather for today. Rain ain't coming or whatever. And so, yeah, I know it's like kind of like a tangent from the question that you asked, but like, yeah, working with available nature has always been a part of the work that I create, because I understand the value of a studio when, seasonal climate changes in other parts of the world. Right, so I had a dream. I don't dream very often, so this was a pleasant surprise for me. I had a dream about a mother Moko and her children. And so when I had this dream, I was like, okay, I have to do this Moko. And if anyone's familiar with that story, or well, amongst these stories, one of the stories is that in the process of folks being kidnapped from Africa and coming into the Americas, that their protection spirit, Moko Jambis, would cross the ocean. They were so tall that they literally just walked across the Atlantic with them. And so that connection with water is, it's there. And I, kind of just really trying to remember, because for me as well, like 5 minutes after I wake up, that dream done start to fade, right? So it like trying to sketch and like pull the elements of that very quickly. I realized when I was sketching this Moko that as they were crossing the Atlantic, they were picking up elements of the ocean. And so that's where like the shell, which is made, I'm trying to remember all of the makers that I work with, and I'm struggling right now, sorry about that. I worked with, this is paper mache by, I don't know why my memory is doing that to me right now, but yeah, I knew a conch shell was important. Conch shells have had like historical, significant importance in African liberation. And so that was one of the elements I wanted in this work. And I imagined this mother Moko, as I said, with two children. And so when I went to the 2015 Queen of Carnival and asked if she would do this, I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna work with you. And then as I was about to leave, because I went to her in Claxton, where I visited her near her home. And I remember, like, I was about to leave. And then I was like, so I had this dream, right? And I didn't know if I could pull it off. I feel like it's real effort. Like, do you vibe with this? Like, I was wondering if there were, like, 2 children I could possibly have with you to create this work. And then she just watched me, and she's just like, you know, I had 2 daughters, right? You know, both of them just walk stick. And I was like, ugh. And so it was a seal deal. And so part of why they're white, they don't have color and they don't have these elements on it is because I imagine that these are the Moko children born here and they haven't yet been doing their journeys in the oceans or their journeys with Trinidadians to pick up their elements of the world. Yeah.
When you're doing the costume design, are you
Yeah.
thinking about the photography? Or does the photography kind of come afterwards?
For me, the photography, I want to say yes and no. It depends. It really fluctuates. It depends. Sometimes it does. For a lot of this series, it didn't. I knew I wanted to play when I was capturing the work. Once I designed it, they were built. Yeah, I just wanted to play at that point. Because part of the thing is like, as I say, conceptually thinking about it, like design, it's planned. So I kind of know, boom, this is the thing. And then play creates that space for surprise. So I kind of like that.
Who did the making for this one?
Robert Young and the cloth. So I think, his team was involved in building this. And
The conch shell is wire.
the conch shell is paper mache. I don't know why I'm not remembering her name right now.
Two-purpose one for sure.
Turunesh paper mache this conch shell for me. I'm in her debt. And I get it. It was another one of those situations where like, so I want to do a headpiece from Moko. It kind of had to be able to, I want it big, but it had to be able to handle the wind. It can't be too heavy, and I want it freestanding on the head. And I know you ain't really do nothing like that before, but let me try a thing now. Cool. So Ole, that's the end of this presentation. This is my reading list. In case anyone is interested at all, these were the references, and you can ask me questions about it. If it's too dull and boring, we could just move on. But yeah, this is pretty much distilled references. There's other stuff. It's like the distilled references that Chris and I reflected on in building this work. So yeah.
So what happens to all the tactile work?
They're still in storage. An initial idea was to exhibit it as part of the exhibition, but those COVID restrictions really kicked us. Shipping during lockdown. Shipping during lockdown. We all know that global shipping was disrupted. So it was a period. I'm very grateful that this show was mounted. Especially with, as I said, I think we shifted date at least 4 times.
So actually another question. So given that a lot of the work was based on a kind of internal story that you wrote for yourself and you didn't make public, and then the Moko image, for example, was sort of fed by a dream that you had. What would you say is the function of fantasy in creating art, and then maybe even fantasy in understanding life?
I think fantasy, when you said fantasy in my mind, I kind of immediately translated into imagination. So like I heard that word and then I was just like, replace that, imagination. For me, creativity is imagination. I think part of how the challenges that I think, at least for me, I think some of the world's challenges come from a lack of imagination and a lack of fantasizing about how it could be better. I think the folks who are doing that are the folks who are pushing the world in different directions, because I try to think about things very broad, and so there's like, with that said, some folks are fantasizing about things that we would consider as negative, you know? But yeah, I think for me, it's at the core of everything creative. I always say this, I would never want an unimaginative or uncreative surgeon. What happens when the process goes wrong while you're in the process? You need to figure it out. That's imagination.
So a lot of it, I mean, you talk about it quite a lot. I mean, it's obvious about collaborations. You know, in your bio, it seems that, I mean, the stuff in your bio is all quite collaborative work. You know, this is a
major testament to collaboration.
Talk about, if you might share, how you form these collaborative networks. I mean, is it people, is it strangers? Is it co-workers?
So sometimes, so how I build from my network, that's what I've been doing. So folks that I connect with are then the branches to connect with other folks. And so, you know, that for me is an essential kind of rooted part of Trinbagonian society. I think because I'm no longer a youth, but for a long time I was calling myself like a ghetto youth. As a youth from like the hills of Belmont, from a particular like socioeconomic background, in lieu of the money, your network is everything. Like how you treat people determines what you're able to negotiate in exchange, right? And at the core of everything I think in this world is our relationships. There's nothing more valuable about it, and once trust is gone, trust is at the core of that, and once trust is gone, I don't think you can get anything done. So I do my best, and I'm not perfect at it, to not abuse anyone's trust. So I go in every situation with what I'm practicing, and as I said, everything is a work in progress, with what I'm practicing, which is just transparency. I'll let you know, this is the budget. I'll let you know, I try always to find the budget, right? But this is what I have to work with. What are you able to do within this constraint? I think when I've traveled up the islands, I've heard about the Trinidadians so many times, and I just never wanted to be that person. So, yeah.
So you'd say the core of trust is transparency?
No, I think trust is at the core of everything. At least that's how I think about it. There's trust, and then transparency is a tool to facilitating trust. You know, this is where I stand, this is where I'm from, this is who I am, this is what I'm trying to achieve. Here is the outcome I envision. Okay, that outcome has changed. How can we pivot together? That's like 80-90% of the work to me. You know, I feel like I spend like 1% of the time making art because my practice, I've always envisioned it as a collaboration. This body of work is collaborative. So all of it is this reciprocal energy of sharing space with people. Yeah.
Did you, sorry, forget the name of the other artist.
Oh, Chris?
Chris.
Yeah.
Did you know Chris from before? Or?
Yeah, so I met Chris in 2014. He did an exchange with UE. I had actually graduated. I was in between programs. And I met him everywhere but UE. He was in like all the spaces. He was in Alice Yard. He was at Che Lovelace's place where his place is. I just met him all the art spaces. I think Chris possibly saw more of Trinidad than the average Trinidadian. Every weekend he was staying in somebody's house, some auntie he met, because he is a church boy, right? He grew up in that type of network in Tacoma. And so he really leveraged that. He was in aunties and uncles' houses on a weekend all up and down this country. He had a time when he was here, and so I met him, and we really connected the last week of his stay in Trinidad, and then we haven't stopped talking since. Yeah. So that's how I met him, and it's the nurturing of that relationship, certainly led to this project, but has led to a myriad of other things that we've imagined and fantasized about together,
I have 3 more. So I don't have copies. All right.
I want to hail out some folks who was behind the scenes helping on this production. There's Rhonda Chansu. Yeah, she helped me on this production. There's Ava Atherton. She helped me on this production. There's Jonathan Chan. He helped me on this production. This is in the interim. There's Tavona McDavid. She helped me on this production. There's Joel Cabrice, who helped me on this production. And then maybe first, I feel like I spoke with you. You wasn't actually on set, but I spoke with you, Tracy. That happened. Blair, you might have been abroad. I think you might have been abroad. You might have been abroad as well, Nicola. And I think I did give you a call, but you may not have known what it was about, Michelle. Yeah, I might have given you a call during lockdown. Yeah. Yes. Sean, so I have this habit, right, of not taking my batteries out of things. And all the photographers in the room would know what that means. I unfortunately damage a lot of my own equipment. And so I'm typically turning to Sean at the absolute last moment to bail me out. And he's a rock star.
Yeah, sure. As we touch on it, I know a lot of photographers like gear, so you just want to quickly mention what kind of camera you use.
Canon 60 Mark II. Yeah, I think I shot this whole thing on that.
Well, this was natural light, or did you use
Strobe, I use I can't tell you which model, but I use one of those, one of the Godox. When I started photography, which is not even that long ago, those were not a thing. So this wireless, I could shoot whole day and not worry about it. To all the younger photographers, y'all have it blessed. Y'all just came up in an era where that was. I remember, Smales and his battery packs to power these lights, and because I was his assistant for a little bit, and I remember toting that. So it's a world apart for shooting outdoors now. Yeah. Cool. Well, ask me something now.
I have questions.
Uh-huh.
So you were talking about how you didn't specifically the gendering of your
I was thinking about femininity, but I was, intentionally trying not to lay my presumptions agenda on the work.
because when you speak about you do gender them. When you talk about priestesses,
Yeah.
you talk about female figures essentially.
Yeah.
So in obscuring the faces, is that deliberate to take away that gender element, and is it like you wanted to avoid?
That's a good question. It's a number of things. So I love masquerade. And remember I mentioned my practice for a long time has been just being in public in costume and nobody know who I is. So I brought that to the work. But with this work, I particularly wanted viewers to appreciate the messengers as messengers and not in a way be distracted by the person embodying, this is the being as is. So that was the intention with the mass The first one, which is, I'm just gonna talk about like a few, like the first one, the gold figure in the river, that mask is wire. She crochets and she has crocheted with wire before. That mask is entirely made out of wire by, I don't know if she'd want me to call her auntie, but Mrs. Lewis from I think she still has her shop in the Port of Spain market on Charlotte Street. And I went to her to work on this mask. I'd heard that she had crocheted with wire before. And I was like, hey, you could do that. You could find a gold wire and make that work. And she did. Mark Eastman helped me with crafting these locks as well. So yeah, I'd go to folks with my sketches and just be like, is the general idea? Can you work on this or no?
In general, do they get where you're coming from with the idea, or is it just like...
I mean, I hope so. They work on it, right? I really hope so, but...
for example, the impression is just like...
You know, he's a gentleman who just loves living where he is, like being in the bush. I don't think he has a cell phone, like, so I would have to go to him in Togo every time to see how it was progressing, where he was at. Yeah, it's really, I hope he, you know, I think as well when I was having our conversations with them, I was still in some level of development, so I'm not certain if I was even articulating it that clearly, you know?
You ever went back and showed them that you finished?
Oh yeah. There's more, it's one of those things, I think as you said that I was like sitting with a little bit of disappointment. There's some of the navigating that lockdown chewed up a chunk of budget for this production, because there's more that I had hoped to do with the folks who had helped me make the work. But yeah, it just wasn't, budget done. Yeah, so it was a grant, it was an application made on Slideroom, anyone who knows where grants sit. As I said, back in 2016, it was the James W. Ray Award, which, when I talk about collaboration, this is part of it. So I'm not, as a Trinidadian, I'm not eligible for that grant, but Chris is. And so in that partnership with Chris, I became a co-recipient of this grant. And that some of my work is funded that way in partnerships with artists. And I know saying that is a whole heap of distance away from doing it. I think we all know this, working with people can be beautiful and on the other hand can also have its challenges. And so it is a continuous work to build that level of trust, especially when awards and grants come into play. Contracts. Contracts. And with that said, a contract is only as valuable as your ability to enforce it.
Any advice about people thinking about applying for grants? I mean,
Do it.
No, but I mean, you know, like where to apply,
As I said, so like I have a haphazard process right now. It involves my friends who nowadays see more than I do. For like a couple of years, I was like really stalking the internet, and I had my little, like, I use visualping.com to like monitor different websites and just let me know whenever they've updated it. I joined. No, I never do that because I can't do everything. You know, everyone has, I've heard different strategies, right? So I'm just going to talk about my own. I look at the budget. I look at the requirements. So as I said, for instance, there's things as Trinidadians that I may not be eligible to apply to. So who do I have a good connection with in that space? What do I know about their level of transparency? And then I might go down that road and apply with a collaborator to achieve those funds. Unfortunately, and this might be a little bit of a meander from your question, is I'm still really disappointed with the arts funding in the Caribbean. Most of the arts funding that I see that comes up in the Caribbean is really developmental funding that they're calling arts funding. And what I mean by that is the funding I've received in the global north, so different parts of Europe, the US, very little like financial requirements. You know, they ain't really trying to pry too much in your details. You've awarded it. I myself have been surprised that with all of this like source of funds and all of that kind of stuff, that foreign entities, the museum, whatever, will just send thousands of dollars to my bank account. Y'all, I'm not rich. They'll take this and weaponize it. Whereas, you know, there's recent grants I've seen float around in the Caribbean where they want your tax clearance, you know, they want your registered business. They want, one of the most bizarre ones was on the cusp, you know, we was in lockdown more than the rest of the world, right? Like longer, periodic wise. Like the US was wilding for a whole year before we decided to end lockdown, right? They was asking for like 3 years financials. 3 previous years was locked down for artists funding from a Caribbean entity. I'm really, it's unfortunate, but I do think as a community, we do need to organize together a lot more to push for institutions to eliminate those barriers and to create more opportunities for funding of artwork in the region. In Trinidad and Tobago, but definitely in the Caribbean region.
Did you give them that feedback?
Sorry?
Did you give them that feedback?
Yeah, I just tell people why I think all the time. Sometimes I'm strategic and I get the award and then I tell them. You know, but I say it all the time. At this point in my career, most of my funding has come from outside of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean anyways. So I don't feel like, okay, so whatever Trinidadian organization or a Caribbean organization victimizes me, it's just like, oh, they wasn't giving me money anyways. So I do any survey, it doesn't matter who it is, CDB have SIF, every survey they send out, I just fill out. And with that said, very few people listen out surveys. But yeah, I will go to the virtual, how do you apply session and say those things like, these are massive barriers to entry. And my general thinking, my base thinking is, I always think from grassroots outwards. So I'm just like, plain talk, how a ghetto youth supposed to do this? Like how is it possible? And more often than not, it's just not. It's just not. Those are the barriers that are in place, and I just know that in the global north, for creatives, they're not given the kind of rigmarole and hoops to jump that we are given to access funding that is not criminal enterprise. I was just like, so criminal enterprise is thriving, in case anybody blind. So was all this hoop to deny some artists from doing a thing?
So, I was thinking once to go back to the work.
Mm-hmm.
I think these photographs, you want to spend a lot of time. You always want to lie down on the ground
Mm-hmm.
and just like spend time with them. And you're hearing water, you're feeling the
Mm-hmm.
breeze. And I love the story that you told about the rain and just being able to do that shoot in between 2 rainstorms.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, like, these sites, because like that beach obviously was a spring tide or a very low tide.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how many times do you visit the site before you decide what time of day and when you're going to go there?
So, no, it wasn't even like technical for me because I was at these sites during lockdown. So I kind of already knew what was going on at these before I actually decided I was going to shoot there. Like, you know. I don't know, you could get charged for something in retrospect, like, oh, you was on the beach during lockdown. Like,
So that's why they're so pristine and there's no...
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a moment that I don't know that if we want to experience it again, or that we would experience something like that, like these natural spaces being like what they were, you know? All you good?
Well, I think that is it. So thank you so much, Arnaldo, for sharing that with us. I mean, the work itself, the